The station psychologist for the concordant species believed she had seen everything the galaxy could throw at her. She had counseled a crystalline diplomat who experienced existential dread every time someone walked too loudly. She had mediated an argument between two hive minds who had accidentally merged and then refused to separate because each insisted the other should be the one to go back to being lonely. She had even once guided a sentient gas cloud through a crisis when its preferred habitat vent system was reprogrammed for greater energy efficiency. But then the humans arrived, and it turned out she had not seen anything at all. The first human she met was named Morales, and he greeted her by extending a hand and saying, "Don't worry, I'm mostly harmless." He said it with a grin that displayed too many teeth and a tone that suggested he thought that sentence was reassuring. She had read the file on humans. The word mostly did not statistically reduce the odds of danger in any meaningful way. She asked him what he meant. He shrugged and said, "It's a joke." She made a note that humans considered admitting partial potential for catastrophe humorous. The humans had been invited to the concordant not because they were technologically superior, but because they were, in a way, difficult to quantify, unstoppable. They broke rules by accident, sometimes physically. They broke machines by using them in unintended ways. They broke logic by insisting that improbable outcomes just needed a little try. They were too enthusiastic, too loud, too curious, and too willing to get hurt pursuing something they insisted was worth it. The concordant considered them dangerous. The concordant considered them unpredictable. They were also oddly compelling. The psychologist's assignment was simple: observe, interview, and determine whether humans should be allowed long-term integration with multi-species stations. Within the first week, she suspected the question was already outdated. Humans had begun integrating before anyone officially agreed they could. Morales joined the engineering bay and immediately began labeling things. No one had asked him to. He simply started sticking strips of adhesive paper to consoles with messages like "Do not touch," "Hot when mad," or "This one makes everybody cry," and, confusingly, "Sorry." When asked why, he said, "Helps me remember." Also the vibe check. The Vranton chief engineer, a careful and precise insectoid, hovered anxiously near every label, terrified the stickers would interfere with delicate calibration. They did not. In fact, somehow, accidents in the bay dropped by 23% because it turned out Morales wrote warnings in emotional terms every species could instinctively understand. The psychologist logged this as functional chaos. Another human, Dr. Sato, joined medical. She seemed calm and quiet, the kind of person who disappeared into corners of laboratories for hours at a time. Then she began bringing plants into the infirmary. Not medicinal plants, decorative ones. Green, leafy, useless by concordant standards. She watered them carefully and told them encouraging things under her breath. When asked, she explained that humans feel better around plants, that they recover faster, that it reminds them of places where air and life happen naturally. The doctor from the Gelari species attempted to run a controlled study. 3 weeks later, statistical analysis proved conclusively that recovery rates among all species rose by 8%. Absurdly, even the species that reproduced via mineral budding reported elevated mood. The plants, Dr. Sato said, were just doing their thing. The psychologist wrote, "Humans treat environment as co-worker." The strangest human was Lang. Lang was assigned to xenocultural liaison because he had once studied comparative literature and claimed, with some pride, that he could make small talk with anyone. Within days, he was sitting with the carnivorous Uzel explaining barbecue techniques, then, without fear, having tea with the Ulrani whose entire culture centered around discussing regrets. He listened to stories that went on for 6 hours, nodding solemnly, occasionally saying, "Wow, that must have been rough," or "Yeah, I get that," to entities that barely had mouths. Several species reported that Lang was the first person who ever made them feel heard. Then came a crisis. The outer ring of the station experienced a micrometeor cluster impact. Normally, such events were minor. but one shard pierced the hull near the agricultural bay, slicing through a structural support. Safety protocols activated and sealed the section. Air pressure dropped to emergency levels. There was no immediate threat of explosion, but everyone was told to stay away. Humans did not stay away. Morales ran toward the breach, carrying a toolkit, a sealed helmet, and a snack bar. When a psychologist confronted him later and asked why he ran into a compromised structural zone, he blinked and said, "Because it needed fixing." He added that he had eaten the snack bar halfway there because adrenaline made him hungry. He patched the rupture with foam sealant, reinforced bracing, and something he called sheer stubbornness. The patch held for 48 hours, long enough for engineers to complete proper repairs. The Concordant was grateful and unsettled. Morales shrugged and said, "It's not heroism. It's DIY." Meanwhile, Dr. Sato noticed the plants were wilting from exposure stress. The emergency protocols had reallocated moisture. She carried armfuls of containers to safer zones, apologizing to them as if they could hear. She spoke softly, and species passing by slowed down because the tone triggered an instinct normally reserved for lullabies. The psychologist saw half a station walking more gently, as though not to disturb invisible fragility. It was irrational. It was effective. Lang's absurdity occurred last. The agricultural bay contained a worker from the hern species who refused evacuation. The hern was a spore bearer. If it left too quickly, it risked releasing defensive toxins that would make the entire bay unusable for months. The protocols demanded evacuation anyway. The hern stood trembling, insisting it would be fine, but its body chemistry suggested impending panic. Lang arrived without a suit because the environment was still within survivable limits for humans. He sat down next to the hern and started telling a story. He spoke about his grandmother's kitchen, about simmering soup and bad jokes, about storms outside windows and everyone sitting together waiting them out. He talked about the idea of staying still while chaos existed elsewhere and how sometimes the brave thing was not running, but simply being with someone. He talked until his voice went hoarse. The hern stabilized. Its spores did not release. Rescue crews established a portable containment field. The bay was saved. Afterward, when asked why he told stories during an emergency, Lang said, "Silence gets loud when you're scared. Stories make a different kind of noise." You can replace this text with any text you wish. You can either write in this text box or paste your own text here. Try different languages. They constructed orbital foundries for mining platforms. They welded cannons onto transports, refit agricultural ships with missile racks, turned passenger liners into mobile hospitals, and stripped wreckage fields like predators. And through it all their commanders whisper a mantra I only gradually came to understand. We build for when we're not enough yet. Blueprints of greatness. They called it later first the phrase sounded like ego, but what they meant was different. They build seeds, plans, designs, redundancies, so that the next version of themselves will be stronger than the one that died. Not for glory, not even for victory. For continuity. Be why the 4th month of the war, our fleets and theirs fought side by side over the shattered ring of Arden Prime. I watched a human destroyer sacrifice its engines to drag an Altari carrier into the gravity well of the broken planet. The captain transmitted apologies to his crew for failing to find a better plan. They died with quiet voices. Our doctrine would never have permitted such improvisation. Our admirals would not risk deviation from simulation-tested paths. Yet again and again, I watch human captains rewrite reality under pressure. And sometimes, too often to be accident, their chaos worked out. I began compiling my own secret dossier. Not on their weapons, not on their ships, on their decision-making patterns, their arguments, their failures, their postmortems, the way they teach their cadets by dissecting mistakes so mercilessly that the mistakes become stepping stones. The Council demanded restraint toward humans. Share limited technology. Keep them contained within curated corridors of development. Do not ignite them. But the war was grinding us down. The Altari learned us. They adapted to our formations, anticipated our jumps, cracked our encrypted chatter. Where we were predictable, they grew precise. Where we refused to change, they evolved. It was at Kelbar Reach that I realized the Council was wrong, that we had fallen into a textbook encirclement. 3 Zarin fleets, 1 Terran task force, pinned between overlapping Alt-Hari interdiction webs. FTL collapse. Heat bleeding through hull seams. Ammunition dwindling. Every doctrine we had lived by said the same thing. Hold formation. Preserve command. Die in place if necessary. The human Commodore broke formation immediately. Voices. Change the speed and the pitch of the voice. You can even tweak the SML, speech synthesis markup language, to control how the different sections of the text sound. Click on SSML above to give it a try. Enjoy using text-to-speech. You can replace this text with any text you wish. You can either write in this text box or paste your own text here. Try different languages, and he fractured his ships into triads, leapt short range through micro windows, slingshotting debris, forcing the Alt-Hari to widen their net. He threw false signals, sacrificed drones, even ignited atmospheric fuel from ruptured transports to create sensor ghosts. It was messy, wasteful, borderline madness. My own officers called it undisciplined. It opened a corridor we could escape through. The Alt-Hari nearly crushed him for it. His flagship took catastrophic damage. He refused evacuation, rerouted power manually through radiation levels that should have cooked him alive. He emerged later with burned lungs and glassed eyes and still apologized for the losses. As his ship drifted, our cruisers covered him. We escaped, not because our doctrine was superior, but because a human saw rules as suggestions, tools to be thrown away when they stopped saving lives. That night, I filed a classified report recommending deeper technological exchange with the Terrans. The Council rejected it with annoyance. Humans, they said, required guardrails. The last thing the galaxy needed was a species as volatile as fire-armed with our finest war machinery. They misunderstood both fire and humans. Months later, the Alt-Hari burned our forward shipyards in Erix. We had no place left to rebuild. Our reserves thinned. Our admirals still argued. The humans quietly expanded their foundries and invited us to use them, that we declined. Pride can be a slow kind of suicide. That I was transferred to the 7th Expeditionary Wing, given command of the Warship Vatherin, a Spear-class cruiser with systems classified so deeply that not even all my officers could access them. The ship embodied centuries of careful doctrine, layered shields, precision weapons, predictive combat algorithms, stealth matrices tuned to our exact operational philosophy. Then came the message from Terra. They needed assistance at a staging world called Alexandria, where they had concentrated an unacceptable percentage of their orphan populations, children evacuated from shattered colonies. If the Alt-Hari found it, the slaughter would echo through generations. The Council hesitated. The risk, they said, was too great. The Alt-Hari trap probability was high. Better to preserve our strength for decisive engagements than squander it defending a world that was, strategically speaking, inconsequential. Inconsequential. That I remembered the human Commodore, blind and coughing, apologizing for losses he did everything to prevent. I remembered the destroyer captain pulling an enemy carrier into a planet's death so that strangers might live. I remember the phrase they whispered like prayer. Build for when we're not enough. I disobeyed. I took the Vatherin to Alexandria. For there was a trap. Of course there was. Alt-Hari carriers emerged in a pale tide. Their drones fell like rain. The humans on the ground had dug tunnels, reinforced shelters, built point defense towers from construction machines. They fought like people who refused to believe in inevitability. Change the speed and the pitch of the voice. You can even tweak the SML, speech synthesis markup language, to control how the different sections of the text sound. Click on SSML above to give it a try. Enjoy using text-to-speech.